How many of you done any segmented work? Oh, quite a few. Well, this is like was advertised. This is very, very basic. This is when you don't know anything. So if some of you nod off, I'm sorry, but that was the advertisement, right? If you don't like flat work, then I don't think you're going to enjoy doing segmented turning. If you don't have time, you're not going to enjoy segmented turning. And if you don't have patience, you're not going to like it. And if you don't like accuracy, you don't like it. And if you don't like spending a lot of time with yourself, then don't do segmented turning, because that's what it is. It's a very personal kind of thing. Would you say, Gary? Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to define what is a segment. That is a segment. And a segment has a height, which we'll talk about when we get to the chart. A segment has length. And I know, you look at that and you think, well, this looks like the length. That I had a hard time figuring that out, that's not the length. That's the thickness of your stock, the width of your piece. That's the width of the stock that you'll use. This is the length. And then you have cut angles. You have actually one cut angle, but it's divided into two. This is for a 12 segment ring. And that ring being 12 divided into 36 is 30 degrees. So you've got cut angle of 15 degrees when you set your jig up. So this being cut, sorry about that, would go across the table saw like that, and that's your 15-degree angle, okay? And that's how you end up with a segment. That's what a segment is. The most important aspect of the process is the cut angle and the length. Those two factors, if they're not right, you're not going to have a segment. You're not going to have a ring, because the angle varying varies. You just got to have it right on. Unless you can live with the cracks. The angle is very, very important. The length is also very important. When I first started, man, this is one problem I have with YouTube. You see these guys and they're doing this, right? They're doing this and then you get this big pile, and then they just stick them all together. Well, it's not like that. It's not reality. So the width, the height, the length of your segment, and the angles. You got to pay attention to all that. How do you design a vessel? Well, I didn't want to do what I was told. You draw it out, and I thought, man, I don't want to do that drawing out, but you got to take a grid. And that was one of the handouts. If you guys looked at it, then you know what can you guys see that? I don't know if it's going to be upside down for you or what. There you go. All right. You got a grid, X and Y axis, right? So you want to draw half of your vessel on here. All right? Got it? Okay. Once you draw your vessel on there, that will help you decide how tall the row height is going to be, how many rows you want to stack the thing up, and that will help you set the wall thickness. And we're going to get to that when we see the chart here in a second. The decisions that you make then will determine the shape of your vessel. For example, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows. Those are the heights. And I don't know if these are 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, this is 12. I got stuck on 12, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But that's your row height. When I drew this, I drew a vessel like that, a half of a vessel, just like I showed on this chart. And from that, when you go to the chart, this will give you the key to how many segments you need, depending on what you want your ring to look like, the angle, and the length of your segment. So what you do is, well, you guys don't have your charts with you, but you can think this through. So we go to before I get into that, let me mention something else. And Gary and I were talking about this just before. If you saw that bowl that we held up, it's only, what is it, 3 millimeters?
I give myself 3 millimeter.
Yep.
I go everything in metric. I give myself 3 millimeters excess on the actual.
And what is your, see this guy? This guy's way ahead of me right here. Okay, don't pay any attention to him about these millimeter things. Let's talk about quarter inches. No, I'm kidding, Gary. But what is it's turned down to 1/8 of an inch?
No, I turned it.
What?
I kept it exactly the pitch that I need, and I add 3 millimeters, which is, call it 1/8 of an inch.
Okay. Yeah.
Or extra.
Okay. All right. He's frugal. I'm not frugal, because if you figure it really closely like that, you'll agree you got to stick to your design pretty closely. If you design, you really, yeah. What does this end up to be? 4 millimeter width. So, but you don't start with a. You start with 6 millimeter.
No, generally the pieces on there are about 25 an inch.
About an inch wide. Okay. So the stock, right? The stock that he's using to get this, he started off with a bowl that's an inch thick. For the bowl, but when you put your bowl together, you're going to have a real thick bowl, okay, like an inch. So he takes that and he cuts it down all the way to there. See, all right, this you can see the inside of it. Guys in the peanut gallery, you can see the inside of it. All right, see all the bumps. That's one of the joys of being able to make a hollow vessel that's big. Is you build a few rows, and then you can turn it on the outside. You can turn it on the inside. This is not completed yet. I got another row to go on top of that, but I just did this much just to show you that it's just a beauty to turn when all you're doing is turning face grain. It's just fun. And the stuff comes off like these little squirrely things. Fun to do. Okay, so back to how we get these. If your segment is larger than necessary, it gives you a freedom to change the shape of your vessel. I have yet to accurately draw my vessel and then execute it when I turn it on the lathe, because I'm just not that precise. It doesn't bother me that much. Gary is much more, I'm a mechanical engineer, he's an electrical engineer. These guys are much more meticulous than the rest of us are. We like sledgehammers, you know. But here's the thing: if you're frugal, you're not going to have the chance to change. And this is one thing that I found, especially that Joe pointed out to me, is that if you make a mistake and you bought some cheap wood that has catches in it, right? You get a catch and it splinters off. Oh man, you gotta change something to make that design fit in. So that's why I just go the fatter route with when I make segments. It gives you freedom to change. You might find it necessary if you get a catch. So you draw an angle or a rectangle. You draw a square or a rectangle, which is a special square, and you can see those squares. Those encapsulate the edge of the vessel. All right. Everybody see what I'm talking about? Any questions? Stop me anytime I'm bumbling up, or if you don't understand what I'm trying to say. So every row has all of these 12, going to have 12 segments in it, and they're a certain height. Then you can measure from your center line of your vessel out to the outside of the square or the rectangle that you drew there. Double it, and that is going to be the diameter of your bowl. So then you go to the chart, and on this particular one, it's a 12 segment, and you go to your chart, and let me pick one of these here. So actually I got one already picked out. Okay, so you go to your chart, and the cut angle, number 2, is the cut angle here. So you got your number of segments, you've got your diameter of your ring, and you've got the cut angle. Up here, you'll see that on 12 segments, the cut angle starts out at, that doesn't start out, it is 15 degrees. And then after that, you start out to go over here to get the size of your ring. So if you have a 7-inch ring, it's what 7-inch ring, you go down to number 7, and then you go across to 12, and right there between 7 and 12 is 1.8756. Is there any sense in dealing with 1.8756? So you could go to 1.8, you could go to 1.75. It's not that big a deal. Joe ran these out to 4 places, bless Joe's heart. But you know, I do use a caliper, and I kind of try to get close to those. I use I do inches. Gary does millimeters. So you've got your angle, 15 degrees. You got your diameter, 7 inches, and you've got your number of segments is 12. So that's what your ring is going to be made out of. Now then you
have to make a distinction between accuracy and precision. The pieces don't have to be accurate. They don't have to be extremely accurate. If you're within a millimeter, you're okay. If you're within a 32nd of an inch, even a 16th of an inch, you're okay. But every piece has to be precisely the same out to about 3 thousandths. And the only way you can do that is with the jig. So you set your jig up, and then every piece comes off the jig. It's exactly, precisely the same, even though you really don't care exactly what that length is. What's important is that all 16 or all 12 pieces are precisely the same.
Exactly, but that length on each piece has to be exactly the same. Doesn't have to be exactly 1.875, but it's got to be if it's 1.875 on one, it has to be on the other 11, or you won't have a circle. What you will have is you will have cracks. You'll either have cracks on the inside if this is too long, because the ratio between here and here is important. If your angle is off, you won't have anything but cracks, because they won't fit together. This is not glued, and again, I'll tell you, I'm not a meticulous precisionist, but that's a pretty doggone good ring off of my jig. And the other thing about when you start making your rings is the stock that you choose. You have to mark your stock. If you don't mark your stock, every piece has to have a complementary piece. So you're going to have 6 identical pieces and 6 identical pieces, every other one spaced in that ring, because the angle of the blade on your table saw or your miter saw is not going to be 100% 90 degrees all the time. So you have 2 choices when you get to that as to how you cut your stock. Let's go back to the stock preparation first before we get down here to the jig. How do you know how much stock you need? Well, the way I do it, the way Joe does it, is that you know your material thickness, right? We got that off of the diagram, because we made the segments so high, and that's variable. It has nothing to do with each ring. It's just how tall you want the vessel to be. So I usually use about 9/16 for mine. Gary's got some over there that vary in the way he designs his. After you get that out of the way, then you need to know how wide your stock needs to be. That's this width right here. So your stock is going to be a piece like so. And then how many of those are you going to need? Well, the way I do that is you take the segment length. We're talking about this length right here, right? Okay. You take that and you multiply it by 12, because I got 12 segments. And I usually add, you got kerfs in there, right? My saw blade is an 1/8 inch saw blade. By the way, something I didn't put in my notes, but it just popped into my brain this afternoon is, what kind of blade do you use? Okay, he uses an 80 tooth. I use a 60 because I don't have a 80, but the higher the count, better off you are with cutting your segments, because you want the sides of those segments to be really, really smooth. Because the smoother these segments are, the better your glue joint is going to be, and the less crack you're likely to show any variation, and it's going to show up really good. Because when you come over there and look at those pieces, you'll see that the crack is very important, that it's closed up. So then you say 12 times it, and I add something to it. And so I ended up, for the top ring on here, is 29 inches of material to do that. So segmented rings take a lot of material. Now I could have done that with, if I wanted to make it a little bit narrower, I could have come up with a bit less of material that I would need. Does that sound right? 29 inches? It is. Yeah. Okay, and that's an 8.5. This, by the way, this is an 8.5 ring, 8.5 diameter ring, and that's the outside of the ring. Again, that's what you can have on your chart here. When you have that ring diameter, that's the outside of that sketch that you did. Okay, how to cut the segment. We talked about the fact that the blade takes up space, right? I mentioned that, didn't I? Okay. Here's the way I cut segments. This is my gauge that I put in a slot, and I have a little bitty tiny mark there because I was using this whole thing here, and then I found out, you know what? When you take that and you twist it just a little bit, it gives you a different length. So you better have that thing set, but then every time I come back with my segment, I touch the exact same spot. It's important for accuracy. I'll show you what I mean. See, I'm cutting from here to here. This is my blade, all right? And I'm cutting from here to that point right there. So when I run this thing up, I run it up exactly every time to that exact same spot. Then I make my cut. And then I come back, turn it over. Now I flip. I don't do two of these. So that's another thing about the design of the segment jig that you want to use. There are two basic jigs. You use two or use one? Use a wedgie slid?
I use a miter saw.
Or use a miter saw. Okay, if you use a miter saw, you got a good, what kind do you have? Dual?
I have a jig that I use on the miter saw that gives me a zero kerf, so that when I bring the saw down, it's basically a frame that goes along the bottom of the saw and the back of the saw. And what that allows me to do is make fine adjustments on the angle, because even with my DeWalt saw, the angle is so critical, it's impossible to measure the angle close enough. Even with a digital caliper, you can't measure the angle close enough, and your stop, even at a 30-degree stop on the saw, isn't good enough. At least on mine it isn't. So by using the jig, I can adjust that angle slightly. So on my miter saw, I'm off the thickness of a manila folder on the end of my jig. So I stick a piece of manila folder back there, and that moves it a couple of thousandths. And that's 16 times that distance shows up on because there's 16 rings. But that little bit of adjustment, that lets you make it on the jig. The other problem with the miter saw is that when you lift the blade, it tends to lift the piece, and that'll give you a rough edge. And what you have to have is you have to have some way of holding the segment down. So I've got a hold down on the jig that keeps the segment from lifting. Otherwise, get a little bit of roughness along the edge. Torque on the blade is extremely important. I got a brake on my blade, and if I start and stop the blade every time, it loosens up the blade eventually. And it doesn't, not enough to feel loose, but enough to change the blade geometry, and that'll give you a little bit of roughness. So I have to torque the blade and check the torque on the blade. And I don't stop the blade between segments. I'll cut a whole 16 segments with the blade rotating. I just lift it up all the way, the car covers it, so it's not dangerous. But you can't start and stop the blade, in my experience, because it eventually the brake loosens up the blade. So that is necessary for the good cut. And I think what else I do to get the cut. The torque is almost always an issue, and the hold down is almost always an issue. And then the other thing that you find is that you'll get a slight burr along the edge of each cut. You can only see under really a lens. But what I do with each piece when I get done is I'll take an emery board and just go across, not the surface you glue, but just that little edge, and just knock that burr off. And it's those three things: knocking off the burr, keeping your blade tight, and using the hold down with an 80-tooth blade will give me joints that are just about perfect. And if you're not perfect, I can give you a hint later on about how to guarantee that every single ring is absolutely perfect. There's a trick. And I'll
Cool.
about that later.
They want that. Thank you, Gary. Okay, so he brought up something that is not a problem with the table saw, and that is the movement of the blade, or the difficulty of holding it down. I don't have that problem on the table saw. This is how I would cut a segment. This slides in a slot. This locks in a slot. When you bring this up, you bring it up, it's going to be like this, and I'm touching that right there, exactly, every time. And then I hold this like this, and I push it right across the blade. That falls off like that, and that's why I have that little thing built up right there on the side of the blade, just to get it off the blade. Otherwise, it'll just lay there on the blade, and it might kind of kick back towards you, or worse than that, it'll damage your piece. So you have to cut an extra. You don't want to be wasting wood on extra slot or extra what is that? Segments. Thank you. This is post-COVID. Exactly. Okay. So you run it through there, and you cut the thing off, and it falls off, right? All right. I pulled this back just a little bit like that. I pull it back. Then again, I go up here like that, and I cut my next one. And then I pull it back after that one falls off. And you get a burr. We'll talk about that. I call it giving it a haircut. So you can use chop saw, you can use a sled, you can use a wedgie sled. This is a kind of a wedgie sled, and if you go online, there is a guy named Jerry Bennett. Anybody ever see that? Anybody see Jerry Bennett's? Go online to Jerry Bennett's segeasy.com. By the way, you'll get these notes, and you can read them to your significant other when you get home. Relive the joy of this demonstration. By the way, I want to tell you something. I hate demos that don't have the lathe running. I just really hate it. So I'm sorry, but for this stuff, learning it like this, I think is a wise way to do it. Besides, we'd have to have a table saw in here, or a miter saw, or whatever. But okay, two methods for cutting them on here. I use the method of flipping. You mark your stock on one edge, you mark the top, adjacent edges, and that way every other one, like these, are marked. There's the top, and there's the inside, right? See that? Here's one. The top is marked, the outside is marked. These two will be complementary if the tops are marked and the inside, one is marked and one is not. Your blade may be canted just slightly. And I got an example to show you, or an extreme example I'll show you. But that is as good as you're going to get if you slide everything across the way I was showing you. You end up with an absolutely flat ring like that, but we can always put it back together, right? Because I've got them marked. I've got them marked. All right. So that is for when you use one guide bar and you flip it, flip it, flip it, flip it. Every other one will have the inside or the outside marked. All right. Now, if you want to really be fancy, and I haven't done this, but you can really be fancy. I'm going to show this up here. Is that showing there? Okay. All right, that's okay. You see the angles? Now, these are not exactly the same lengths, but I just did that to show you that these fit together because every other one, I marked it. So this is a complement of that. This is a complement of that. If you can't take this one out and put it over here because you see the angle, right? And every segment that you cut is actually like this. It's just not this exaggerated. So that's why you want complementary angles. And once you get the complementary angles, you're good. That make sense? Any questions? We're going too slow? I'm not losing anybody? Nobody? About the wedgie sled. And when you look at Jerry Bennett's thing, you'll see he uses a deal like this and wedgies, 36, 18. This is 20 degrees and that's 10 degrees. So the way he does it, put that in there and put that in there. And I've got two things that tighten it up over there. And I was too cheap. I didn't want to buy these things because they're not cheap. I don't know, they're about $25 a piece. Yeah, a lot. They're a lot. And so you put that in there, and that gives you the ability to cut one like that. Then you slide this up there. You don't flip it. And then you cut one like that. And then you slip it back there and you cut one like that. And you cut one like that. And you end up with segments that are complementary because you're using that side of the blade cuts that one, this side of the blade cuts that one, and you end up with a complement. Usually you put a 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2 on. That is one way to do it. To me, that's complex. I don't mind flipping it because, I mean, I've got this thing right here set at 15 degrees so that it comes out. I am probably going to build 4 sleds because I don't want to change that angle. Took me a long time to get to that angle, and I just don't want to change it. So that's the 2 ways to do it with the sled if you choose to go with the table saw. 2 cardinal rules. Got it down here again. The angle has to be accurate. The angle has to be accurate. The length must be accurate. Now, Gary said it don't have to be accurate, or what? I can't remember the term. It has to be precise. They all have to be equal to each other. Okay. All the angles on all of the segments have to be exactly the same angle. All of the lengths on the segments have to be the same length. Otherwise, you'll end up with some things that look a little like that. I'd pass these around, but I'm really ashamed of them. I just had to bring them to show you that early on. Oh, here's another thing. Sometimes when you make a ring, there are multiple ways of putting them together. I hate that word multiple. There are various ways of putting them together. You can take 2 of them at a time. I've got one of those, is it a phenolic board? Yeah, I got one knot. You can put you some glue on there and squeeze them together like that, and do them like that, and slide them like that, and hold them like that for about 3 seconds, and they are set. And then you take 2 more. I didn't check to see if these are the same ones, but anyhow, you take 2 more and you do the same thing. You slide them together like that, and they are set. They'll set there. You can pick them up. And they'll stick together. Once you do that, go around, get all 6 of them, then you can come back and you can do this. And you can put those 2 together like that. Oh boy, yeah, there you got them stuck together. And then you do 2 more and you end up with a half ring. That gives you the ability, if for some reason you're off on something, to be able to take 1/2 of one ring and 1/2 of another ring and take a sanding board like this and pretend that's a half ring, and you just scrub it on there a little bit, right? Until you make these 2 meet together. Well, I tried that. I wasn't good at that. I never did get it right. This ring over here is way smaller than the other half ring. So I didn't really like that method. Gary talked about the, what you call that when you get the fuzz on the edge of it? The burr. Okay. So Joe Giannina said, look, you take your piece of MDF, get your piece of 180 grit, 120 grit or something like that, and you give them a haircut. So after I cut the segments, I take every one of them. This is not a sanding operation, it's just a haircut, just like that. Just like that. And then that's a good idea. I do touch that, but I don't scrub it. I just do it enough just to knock that edge off. But there again, that's, you learn, right? That's not to touch it. Okay. I'm guilty, Gary. Yeah, so there you go. So you give them a haircut, and that helps because they will all splinter, and some material splinters worse than other. Acacia, I built something out of acacia, and it wasn't very nice to me because it really splits off on the edges really badly. Something else I didn't mention about the stock that's really important is if you use this method, you run out of stock, you still need to keep going. If you, let's say that you just cut a segment. Now this has to do with the marking, okay? Because we're going to stick with the complement. If the last segment that you cut is like this, all right? See that's marked on the outside, or it's marked on this side, and then the top marked on this side and the top. That was the last cut I made off of that. So what I ended up with was a segment that had a wide part, the length, and narrow was not marked. The wide part would have been marked. I wish I'd brought another little piece here so you could see what I'm talking about. Yeah, okay, this will do it. This will do it. Pretend that this is the one I just cut off, all right? Then this one is the segment that has that on the outside. The next segment I want is the one that's going to be narrow, and it's going to have that on the inside, all right? So when I run this up, you can see that that one's going to be the short edge, right? So that's going to be my complementary piece to that one. Since this was the last one that I cut off of, wait a minute. If this one were the last one that I cut off of a piece of stock, forget about being a segment now. This is just a cutoff. I held that with a clip. I held that with a clamp, and I ran it across there, and just barely got. That's all I could get out of it. Boy, there's another segment there, and I sure hate to throw that away. I haven't figured out a way. I built a sled to try to do these and save all these pieces. It was a disaster. Just throw it away. I'll make a cutting board with them or something. Anyhow, if I just turn this over like this, then I'm good to go for the next piece. But if you don't match the new stock with the last piece that you cut of the old stock, and you got 10 rings and you got 2 more to go, then you won't have 2 complementary matching pieces. All right, we'll leave it with that, but that is something you'll learn if you didn't get it, you'll learn it. By the way, I dropped these a while ago, and since I'd marked them, I put it back together just like it was. You might notice that I have this little cable clamp on there. Joe has been through many iterations of how he puts them together. The way I was showing you to put the 2 together and then put the 4 together, that's the first way that Joe showed me. And then Joe got onto the cable clamps. And so there are a number of ways that you can put your things together. You can, once you get the rings, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but while we're already talking about that, you can use these. This is not a pun, but the point is that all of the points have a little bit of pressure on them. You don't have to squeeze them to death. There's 2 things that you never do. I like to say this because it's so true of any kind of woodworking. You never starve a child, and you never starve a joint. If you starve a joint, you're spinning your wheels. Pressure does not make a good glue joint. When you put a joint under pressure, you're squeezing all the sticky stuff out of it. You're taking the life out of the joint. So, but anyhow, that's what you want. You want those points to just have a little bit of pressure on them. And but yeah, Joe went to Lowe's and he got one of those clamps that where you can do it. And it wasn't to put a lot of pressure on it, but it was just to handle it. So then you've got this thing, and it's this big, and you've spent money on these things, and they're not cheap. But there's a secret weapon, and I don't know if I can find it or not here, but yeah, here we go. That's a clamp release, and it's really simple. Once you pull that off, you can stick that up in there, and you can just pull it back and reuse these. I've reused them a number of times. So we get ahead, but so yeah, we've now got our pieces all prepped. We've got the hair off of them. We're ready to assemble them. Use plenty of glue. I slot glue on. How you put your ring together, that's up to you, and you might go through three or four different ways to do it. I've done it with just putting them together and rubbing them. I didn't get great results out of that. This is the best result that I've gotten. When I've used smaller rings, I've used some clamps like you know 4-inch that you use on your your dust collection. I've used those like that. And so if you go to, how many of you have ever heard of Earl's Small Segment Shop? Yay! By the way, Joe, go on YouTube, look up Earl. He's fun to watch. You might go to sleep while you within, but he knows segmented. I mean, his opening is just the stuff that you see in the opening shot. Must be in his living room or somewhere. I don't know, but is his gallery. It's magnificent. So at the symposium up in Raleigh, Joe went and talked to Earl, and they were talking about open segment, and they got into an argument. And Joe said, "Oh, it doesn't matter about the angle of your open segment, because the open segment chart will give you a different angle than the closed segment chart." And they got into a pretty good argument, and Joe went home and he finally figured out that Earl was right after all. That does make a difference, because it makes a difference in the view that you get. So anyhow, long story short, back to Joe. Earl Rasmussen, he is a card. He's a card. So anyhow, what I was bringing him up for is the way he does it. He has a rope, and he's made a little wooden channel about that long, and at the end of it, he has a screwdriver, and there's a notch in the end of the wood. So he's got a piece of wood like this that he put a channel inside, and he glued 2 of them together. And he's got a notch on the end, and his screwdriver bumps into the notches like that, and he tightens the rope up around his. Now, he's a pro, so I'm not going to laugh at him, but I think that's a really difficult way to do it. And the other day I saw one of his videos, and he's got a knob now. Did you see that? Yeah, he's got a knob now, so I guess the screwdriver wore out. All right, so however you want to put that ring together, that's up to you. This is the way I do it. I put plenty of glue on it, and after I got all the glue on it, and it got it on that plastic, what do we call that? Phenolic board, so it doesn't stick to it too badly. Then I take a wet paper towel and I just clean that sucker up, just rub it around there and pick it up and rub it around there and lay it down on some wax paper, let it dry. After I do that, I take it to, how many of you guys got drum sanders? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Tony, eat your heart out, Tony. Look at all these guys got drum sanders. Anyhow, Tony really wants a drum sander. He needs one too. But I run them through the drum sander and put them together one at a time on the lathe. Now, he was talking about, Gary was talking about how he puts them together. I put the ring, I usually start with the base, and some I've done floating bottoms on, some I've tried, if you look at this one, I tried to do the first as a segmented bottom. That doesn't work out real well, and Gary, we talked about that. He cuts a hole in his and puts a plug in it. You can make it a floating bottom, which is preferred because they do expand and contract with the weather, even small pieces. That can be a problem. The thing is that's one really interesting thing about a segmented bowl is you don't get the cracking from the weather because most of the expansion is going to be up and down, and it's all the same material around, and the thickness, it usually doesn't have too much problem with shrinkage across in the cross section across this way. The other thing about segmented turning is the joy of turning. I like to turn anything, but the surface that you can get just off of the tool is amazing with don't have to do a lot of sanding if you keep your tool sharp, and it's just fun to do. Hollowing, that's something I wanted to talk about, and Gary alluded to this when he put together his hollow form. You can, I don't have one well, I have another one here I'll demonstrate, but if you had to go in there and hollow that out like that, it's doable. Guys do it, but it's not fun. So what you do is you do about 3 rows. Pretend this is not segmented, okay? I mean, it's not open seg. Do about 4 rows, finish your outside, and then go inside and finish your inside. Come back, put some more rows on, finish those rows on the outside, go inside and finish those rows on the inside. And so it's just really it's really basic and very very elementary in turning something like that. That's fun. The first open segment I ever did, I didn't even use a jig. I just did that one by hand. I just had to do it. I saw one and I just had to do it. And it turned out pretty good, but if you look at it, you can see the inconsistencies where some of them are that far apart and some of them are that far apart. So, but you know, you just glance at that. My wife has a flower pot that she sets in there. Everybody says, "Well, wow, yeah, it looks really good." That's something. You shouldn't tell us all your mistakes, man. You're the only one who knows about them. On your pins? You don't need to tell us those things. All right, so the matter of clamping, you can clamp it however you want to. Don't cut those cable ties if you use those. The other thing that I do is I do what I call the whack-a-mole. When I get these things down here and get them all in the clamp, I have a mallet that I just go around and tap them and tap them and tap them and make sure that they're down just as good as they can. And like I said, I'm not like Tony. I do have a drum sander, and I can take those little glitches out of it anyhow. So it's not a real big deal. Dry the rings, run them through the sander, flatten them, put my base on the lathe, put them on row by row by row. And this probably didn't take, I probably don't have an hour in gluing these rings on, because you can glue them on, let it sit there for five minutes or so, and then glue another one on. After I got about 4 rings on, I let it sit then for I probably let it sit for 3 or 4 hours then, and then turn the outside of it. As long as you don't really hack, I mean, I just use Type Bond Original, and I also use Elmer's white glue, Elmer's white wood glue. I thought that was, before I understood what it was, I thought it was just like that stuff you get in school for putting paper together. Just because that idea, Elmer's, well, that's junk. I don't want to, I'm not going to use that on something that I'm trying to make something really nice out of. But the white Elmer's glue is good, and you can't even see it. You can't even see it in the cracks. I mean, it just goes away. So that is pretty much the way I do it. Now, some people have presses that they put them in. I've got a press, but haven't used it yet because I hope they stay up there. The lathe, it doesn't tie your lathe up all that long, and yeah, it ties it up, but look at all the work that you've put into something. What's a few minutes more on the lathe? That's no big deal. If you want to do a press, if you've got another lathe, then you're good to go with that. But I like to use the lathe to put it on. And of course, when I'm doing the segmenting, we'll talk about that one of these days. I use a jig that ties up the lathe, so no choice on that. I have. I'm not going to spend a lot of time with this, but I'm going to show you a couple of pieces that I've made, and Bob, I'm not going to talk about all the mistakes in it because there are. I shouldn't do it. Good advice. Thank you very much, Bob. But this is called a twisted rope design, and I saw this in a guy's gallery online. And I could not, for the life of me, figure out how to do it. And I put out notes to both clubs, and I got all kinds of, well, you do it on the bandsaw. Well, no, I think you have to carve it by hand. And actually, it's just a whole bunch of flat pieces put together, but it's a real long process getting there. But I really, really did enjoy doing that. Somebody said, how long you put in that? I've got at least 80 hours in this thing getting it developed, because that feature ring is really it's a bear. It is a bear. And so anyhow, I didn't bring the first ring that I did because it's not presentable. And so I did my second one. And the ring is a little bit better. Matching it to the, you don't do this like a regular vase. You turn your ring first, and then you build your bowl around the ring. And I'm still working on the best way to do that. It's not a perfect job, but I thought it turned out pretty good. But that twisted rope. So the story behind the twisted rope is there's a guy in England named Bill, and I didn't know who he was, didn't know his name, didn't know anything about it, and I put out on Facebook a call for anybody that could figure out, if they knew anybody that knew how to figure out how to do that ring. And a lady in Oklahoma, Sue Myers, was kind enough to answer me and say, I've seen that before, and I'll try to figure out where I saw it. So she did some research, and she found this guy in England. I can't remember his last name right now. His name is Bill. And he sent her a couple of pages of how he did the ring. And it is really complicated. You got to build jigs and so on and so forth. One of these days, Joe Giannina, have you heard that name before? You've heard the name before, Joe Giannina? He said that John and I are going to video this and do a YouTube out of it. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, that was great fun. And just as a side note too, I saw the Papa 1947. Anybody seen that guy? You knew him? No. Oh, you need to go on YouTube. Papa 1947. But all the finish on this is really, it's not even done yet. But I just put a few coats of shellac on there, and I used that kind of pad. It's the white. What is it, John? Yeah. What? What's Scotch Brite? Scotch Brite, yeah. But anyhow, I was amazed at how it just polishes it up. I'm not going to throw my build system away, but but it really, instead of sanding between coats, that really works well to smooth out any little goobers that you get in there. Oh, you did? Yeah. Sir John says it's about like 6,000, something like that, using 6,000. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you can get it online cheaper than anywhere else. Yeah. Well, this is. Yeah, but you don't want to pay for Scotch. This is like $12 for a package, whereas you pay about $10 for a pad if you get the brand name stuff. Yeah. Is it almost the same? Yeah. So, what do you do when you put your rings on? You want to alternate the cracks, and you can do that in a number of ways. You can shift them every 1/4 and have a pattern. You can cut all kinds of segments. The jig setup, I can cut all kinds of colors as long as I match up. Like I was telling you before, as long as I match up which ones were cut with that on top and that behind, or that on top and that in front. All right. Then you can mix and match all of those. They'll fit. They absolutely fit. If you watch the SegEasy.com, you watch that and you can see how he fits all different kinds of colors together that were just all the segments cut. So it's a fabulous little system that I enjoy using. Any questions? Yes? In this one, I probably have 30-something hours in this at least. Yeah, because this was trying to figure out how in the world to do that ring. And it's still a long process. Yeah. Yes, Gary, you wanted to tell us? Sure. Okay.
So a caveat, it won't work for a feature ring because it will generate a ring, which is what I'm going to tell you how to do. It will generate a ring which is ever so slightly oval, and it'll mess up the pattern on a feature ring. So this works only if you're doing solid segments. But if you don't have your jig set up exactly right the first time, and setting up the jig takes a long time because you can't measure accurately enough and your index pins aren't accurate enough. So you'll have to do a lot of rings before you get it perfect. So if you want to try one without having a perfect jig, there is a way to guarantee absolutely tight joints. And the way to do it, first of all,
that's okay.
The way that I put a ring together is this is it looks like, well, it's like 5/8 stock, but I usually use 1/2 inch or 3/4. I use blue painter's tape, and just take a piece of blue painter's tape and lay it down on the workshop, and then take your rings one at a time and lay them down on top of the blue painter's tape, and then grab the ends and pull the painter's tape together, and the whole ring comes together perfectly, and you don't have to mess around with the rings falling apart. They're all hooked together on the masking tape. So then once you get them together, what I do is hold them up to the light and say, yep, I got some gaps. So we're going to have to figure out how to get rid of the gaps. So the way to do it, if your ring is not perfect, is to Now I've got masking tape all the way around this. Cut the masking tape on 2 opposite sides, and you'll end up with 2 rings, 2 half rings, okay, that are now masking taped together, okay? Separate those. These aren't glued yet. They're masking taped. And put a 3/8 inch hardwood dowel right exactly in the middle of the joint on each side, okay? Well, first of all, put the glue on it. Lay them back down, take your 2 halves, put your glue on it, and now bring your 2 halves together with a 3/8 inch dowel.
Do you have it dried? Do you let it dry? You let the halves dry?
No. Yes.
Okay.
Well, right now, no. Right now we're in the process of gluing it. The glue is still wet. Okay. Put in your 2 dowels perpendicular to the face. Put your clamp around it. Clamp it. And what will happen is that all of the errors on all of the joints will be forced to the dowel. There'll be no gaps at all because all the pieces will jiggle just enough to force the gaps to the dowels. So what you'll end up with is a half a ring here with perfect joints, a half a ring here with perfect joints, and a dowel separating the 2 halves. Let that dry. And now when you take it apart and put them together, you'll see that all of your error has been forced down to the edges. Am I making sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's great.
So now you've only got errors on the edges. Now what you can do is take the 2 halves and put them together. I don't have a number.
What do you need?
Half, but they'll go together, like this with 2 halves and clamp them. I just use spring clamps. And then go over to, I use either, doesn't matter, you can use either I use a disc sander. Well, I got a 12-inch disc sander, or I can use my belt sander, or you can use a board with a sandpaper on it and just flatten those, because now those errors are all on the flat edge, and you can just flatten the semicircles, okay? And now the only error you now have is any error in the perpendicular dimension on the sander. So now flip the 2 of them 180 degrees. That'll cancel that error, and those 2 halves will go together perfectly. And you'll end up with a ring which is absolutely perfect. And the only problem with that ring is that because you've sanded those edges a little bit, it's ever so slightly out of round. It'll be just ever so slightly over. But when you turn it, that'll disappear. But if you're doing a feature ring, that doesn't work because that little bit of oval will make your pieces not go together correctly. But it will give you a perfect ring. And it's an easy way if you're, a lot of times the first time that I set up the saw, if I don't have my angle exactly right, I'll do a ring that way, and now I'll have to adjust. Now I'll adjust my jig, and I'll do the next one, and I'll still be a little bit off, and I do it that way. And by the time I get to the 3rd ring, my angle is usually right on the button, but I've already not wasted 2 rings trying to get perfect joints. So it'll give you perfect joints every time.
I tried that, but I didn't do a very good job of it. Because the one you're holding is a whole lot smaller than the one I'm holding, the halves. So you can't go wild on the sander.
Oh, yeah, you sanded too much.
I did.
But that makes sense. It's hard to describe the process, but that's a way you can get perfect rings.
That's good. Good. Okay, any other questions, comments? Throw money? Oh, no. Good. All right, I got it. Thank you.